Welcome to Eye on the Issues. Today we're talking with Jim Magagna, and we're talking about land in the state of Wyoming. As everybody knows, there's tons of it. There's only one problem. It's what the government wants to do or is thinking about doing with some of it. Jim, thanks for joining us. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background? You've been a rancher for decades, I gather.
I've been a rancher, running my own ranch since the early 1960s, and it consists primarily of BLM lands with some interspersed private lands that I own and some state trust lands. So every day of my ranching experience has involved interaction either with the BLM or on their land, most certainly.
So if anybody knows how important land is in open space, it's you. What has BLM land and open space land meant for? I would gather it's changed your life, really. It's allowed you to do what you've done.
It really has. Most of the ranching operations in the western part of Wyoming are not viable without the use of BLM lands, because the private lands, they're some of the ideal lands, the meadowlands and that were homesteaded, but they're small tracts and they don't lend themselves to a viable livestock operation without the use of the intermingled BLM managed lands.
So let's talk about the Rock Springs meeting, I gather, the BLM meeting, and what the proposal is for some of the land there in Wyoming, and it's a little disturbing.
It's very disturbing. They actually have spent 12 years developing this land use plan. The currently one they have was developed clear back in the it's 20 some years old, so they clearly needed to update it. They spent over 12 years, according to their own numbers, they spent $8.7 million developing this plan. And as they typically do in this planning process, they developed an array of alternatives, 4 of them in this case. One, as is usually the case, maintain the status quo, don't change anything. One is the extreme preservation approach, which basically threatens all the uses that are out there. The other one goes to the other end of the spectrum and says maximize development, energy development, use of the land. And then there's a moderate, balanced one that we all anticipated and typically is the one that they then move forward with. And we all comment on it. We'll push for some things we want tweaked in it. Some other interests will push for other things. And out of that comes something that we can usually all work with. In this case, after indicating their final meeting with the local governments, the so-called cooperating agencies, counties and conservation districts in 2020 under the previous administration, they indicated to them that option D, which is the balanced one, was most likely the one that would be moved forward. Then here just a couple of months ago, with no notice to anyone, they came out and announced that they were moving forward as their preferred alternative with option B, which is the preservation one, and which one of the most significant things in it, there's 3.6 million acres of BLM land in this area, and almost half of it is being proposed to become what they term areas of critical environmental concern, ACECs, which mean all sorts of constraints on activities that take place out there.
And so do you know why they shifted from one proposal that sounded somewhat balanced to the one that they're talking about now?
Certainly they haven't given any reason for it, but all the indications are from discussions I have had that that's a decision that was made by leadership back in Washington, D.C., based on the goals of the current administration. America the Beautiful, 30 by 30, however you want to term all of that. This fits in with that very well.
So what do you suggest or recommend that people in Wyoming can do to get their voices heard? Is the public comment period open still?
The public comment period is open until November 15th. And of course, we can all comment about what's wrong with it. What we're doing, what I did just yesterday, what the governor has done, and several of the other industry groups in the state representing energy industry and mining and some of the others. We put in a formal request that they withdraw this plan as it was presented and reissue it, not redo the work in it, but reissue it with a different designated preferred alternative. Whether we'll get that or not, I don't know. I would like to think so, but I'm not overly optimistic. Then the second step along with that is saying it took you 12 years to develop this and 90 days for the public to comment on is woefully inadequate. So we're asking for also an additional 120 days public comment period.
Okay, so let's begin by talking about if people do want to comment on this. I gather they go to the BLM website. How do they do this?
They go to the BLM website, and if you go to BLM Wyoming, then there's some links there. I can't get into all the detail here, but
Sure.
it can lead you to the document, how to comment, and you can comment online. I think you can also just mail comments to the Rock Springs field office of the BLM, and that's fine too, although I prefer the online because then there's a pretty good record there. But either way, I believe can work. And normally what we would be encourage everyone to do in an effort like this is comment and point out some of the specific things that you like or dislike. Because this one has gone so far to the extreme, at this point at least, we're urging comments supporting its withdrawal. If that fails, then we'll come back and submit more specific comments, trying to amend it to the extent that that's possible.
Okay, and talk about in your opinion, in your view, in your experience, if this plan, this extreme plan, moved forward, how would it change life for people there in Wyoming?
Well, certainly for anything that's in these designated ACECs, which, as I say, is nearly half of the area, it's very specific. There would be no energy development, not only no oil and gas, but not even any renewable energy. It would preclude any of that. They come out and say, well, livestock grazing will continue. There's hundreds of thousands of animal units of grazing permitted in the area, and we're only in one small area proposing to close 8,000 animal units, which is minuscule. But what they ignore is it's not what they're closing. It's that I've identified 25 different items in the plan that all of which would negatively impact grazing, and they wouldn't shut it down immediately, but they would make it not viable to continue. And much of the grazing over a period of 5 years or 10 years would, I believe, fade away necessarily. There's also great concern that there are provisions in there about road closures and things that could very well result in less public access for hunting and fishing activities, recreational activities in certain areas.
So you sent a request for them to basically revisit this. Who did that go to, and do we have any idea what kind of time frame there is for them to respond to your request?
I sent it directly to the National Director of BLM, Director Tracy Stone Manning, and followed the lead that the governor took on this. We've been sharing our interest in it, and requested that she reply to the request to withdraw by October 17th. So we haven't given her a lot of time, but if they're willing to do it, that should be enough time to do that. And then we'll reassess come October 17th what response we've received and decide on a next step of action.
And so the governor, it sounds like, has reached out. What is the governor? What's the governor's request?
That is the governor's request, and
Okay.
Wyoming Stockgrowers, the Wyoming Mining Association, Petroleum Association, Wyoming, the Wyoming County Commissioners Association, all of these groups have gotten behind that and made similar requests.
Now, for people that pay attention to what's going on around the globe right now, in the country of the Netherlands, farmers are being removed from their land. Farms are being taken away. It's a climate situation out there. That's the excuse they're using. Could you compare and contrast what they're trying to do in the Netherlands to what's happening or with the proposal in Wyoming?
I think here in Wyoming and in the U.S. in general, at least to this point, they're not as straightforward about just saying we want to remove the livestock, but it would achieve much of the same result. If you look at what's in this plan as an example, as I've stated, it would make it difficult to survive as a rancher in the area. The other thing that these things do, because of the language they put in there, you know, there are certain groups out there that want to get rid of all livestock grazing on public lands. And this would give them the tools they need for their incessant litigation, because there's so many requirements in here that it would be hard to find a rancher who hadn't maybe missed on a little bit on one of them, or BLM missed a little on one, and that sets the stage for litigation. So it's not as direct an approach as what you're speaking about in other countries, but it would get us there. And the other thing I think is very critical for all people who are listening to this or looking at this, yes, this is one area in southwestern Wyoming, but if this succeeds there, I certainly foresee that other land use plans that will be rewritten or modified across Wyoming, across the West, where the BLM controls such extensive amounts of the land. In Wyoming, it's 48%. In Nevada, it's over 70%. They will reflect this same culture, this same intent, little by little across the entire West, if the current administration were to stay in control.
And actually, that's where I was going to go with my next question. This obviously is clearly extreme. And you've got to wonder, okay, there could be another president in office in, I guess, a little bit more than a year, really. What are your thoughts as to could this, if this moves in the wrong direction, an extreme position that they're moving in, what would it take to, and any idea what it would take to reverse it?
Well, there are a couple of things. One thing, even now, if the votes were there, Congress could preclude it from going forward. And I know our delegation here in Wyoming has been looking at some ways with the budget process going on now. Would it be possible to be able to put a provision in that would deny the use of any funds to implement this plan? And that may be difficult in the current Congress, but that's one avenue to be pursued. If this goes forward, then they have to go through a process of finalizing this and implementing it. And under some of the regulations that are in place, if that were to occur within a certain time frame near the end of the current administration, and I believe, I want to say it's 120 days, but I'm not positive on that, there is a provision, the Congressional Review Act, that would allow Congress coming in next year to remove it if it's done very near the end of the administration. That's why I'm certain this administration wants to move fairly rapidly with this, so they're not subjected to that. Otherwise, once the plan is finalized and put in place, it's a lengthy process involving National Environmental Policy Act analysis and that for a new administration to come in and simply issue a new plan to supersede the current plan.
Really last question. Talk to me about your thoughts on climate change and what extremists believe about it and versus what you believe about it.
Well, as I mentioned, I've been a rancher for 60 some years, and I've seen a lot of climate change, and I expect to see a lot more. So I believe that climate change, changing climate, I like to use climate change is such a politically loaded word. I stay away from it, but I do talk about climate variability because our climate is variable. It changes over time. Do human activities have some influence on that? Possibly, but to think that we're in a climate crisis and that crisis is driven by what we've done as humans and we need to undo our lifestyle in order to save the climate, that simply is a theory that I see no evidence to support.
Mm-hmm. This kind of reminds me a bit about of Y2K.
Yes.
All the money that was spent to try to not knowing what was going to happen when those computers hit the year 2000. And for the most part, it was all a waste.
And I'm sure there were some people very disappointed that it didn't happen. Those
right,
who had
exactly. Well, Jim, is there anything else you want to add that I'm not asking you?
Well, I think that there's one or two other things that come to mind, and these are just thoughts. I can't verify them, but that this happened, and the first one of these that went this far is in Wyoming. I think that can be an indication of a couple of things. One, the current administration in Washington, D.C. knows that they don't have many friends in Wyoming. And I think that's a factor. The other one is that some very good work that was done by our former Senator Cliff Hansen clear back in 1950. Wyoming and Alaska are the only two states in the nation where the president cannot declare national monuments. He's done it recently in Utah and Arizona, looking at some in Nevada and other places. He can't do that in Wyoming. And my own mind has me thinking that this may be an attempt to accomplish some of those same objectives that can't be accomplished through an executive order.
I bet you're spot on with that. I bet you're spot on. That sounds, yeah, right on the money. Well, Jim, thank you so much. For people that want to find out more about the Wyoming Liberty Group, you just go to wylyberty.org and sign up for the newsletter. Jim, thanks so much. We really appreciate your time. We'll have to talk more in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate all that Wyoming Liberty does.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.